Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm honoured to be giving your keynote address. I think it's very pertinent that 24 years ago this week, I was stood thigh deep in my home in floodwater. And in fact, I posted a picture of me looking rather cross outside my home. Little did I know that the direction that event, and it was the worst event, I had been flooded before, would actually, the journey it would take me on. And 24 years later, to every single day of my life is taken up with flooding. So I really want to talk to you about property flood resilience, because people just think it's products that you fix to your house, and it's absolutely not. Property flood resilience is knowing your flood risk and actually owning that flood risk. I work in a project that's again, it's one of the FCRIP projects that the Sand project is in Northamptonshire. We put out a questionnaire to people at risk of flooding to ask them various things like, did they think flooding was getting worse, and were they worried about climate change? And we asked them, they all said yes to things like that. We all asked them if they thought their property was at risk of flooding. And only 8% of all the people that answered said yes, their property was at risk of flooding. All the others didn't. So they didn't know or didn't accept. So I was on the Jeremy Vine show on Radio 2 earlier this week, and I said to everybody, just type into a search engine, is my property at risk of flooding? It will take you straight through to the .gov website. You can put your postcode in, and if you are at risk of flooding, you can sign up for a free flood warning. It's a no-brainer. And of course, the next bit is, if you are at risk of flooding, is planning and preparing. So I have invented or put together a household flood plan, because I don't know about you, when you're flooded, when the flood warning comes, your mind turns to spaghetti and your heart goes into a heartbeat when you get that flood warning. It goes into overdrive. But actually having something written down, the process that you should go through when you flood and in what order, will help you actually do that and help you do it in an orderly fashion and make you feel that you've taken control of the situation. Now, one of the things I would very much like to say is ban the sandbag. I have that photograph, the large one, was sent to me from Somerset when they were all calling for sandbags. But look, I tested sandbags in a Kite Mark certified flood tank, and I put 4 there, which is roughly what we get given, and 4 failed in only 59 seconds from turning the water on, and 10 failed in 2 minutes 5 seconds. So let's stop wasting our time running around for heavy, environmentally unfriendly sandbags and think about other things that we can use. First of all, as I've said, to sign up for a free flood warning, it really is a no-brainer not to, and I can't understand why people don't. Now, I recently made a YouTube film on preparing your home for flooding. I'm glad you've seen the welly boots. Yes, you can use all these cheap things. It doesn't have to cost a lot. For Wellington boots on table legs, buckets or plastic bins. My husband's a keen DIYer, so we used his decorator's trestles to put the table up. And I kept a stash of plastic boxes to put all my memories in. It was the thing that I still feel upset about today, that I lost my children's nursery drawings, their hospital memorabilia, their little handprints, everything that I was saving up from their lives to floodwater and lobbed into a skip. So really, I always say to people, go into a room, look at everything below waist height and put it in a plastic box. So, and then you can see me, if you're by yourself, I've got a couple of scraps of wood from the garden. There's always scraps of wood in our garden, and a plank of wood to lift up furniture. And you can put bricks in polythene bags because bricks are dirty or anything, and you can keep lifting it up to get it out of harm's way. So it's perfectly doable and it doesn't take very long. And on the film as well, I used, because this is flooding in a hurry, my film, aluminium tape. Now, if you're going to use anything that's not a certified flood product, use aluminium tape. Again, I've tested it in a certified tank. And about 3 weeks ago, I went to a place, M3 in Worcestershire, where they've got a certified tank, and we were training AXA Insurance, and they were put in a house which has got flood doors and flood windows, but they'd been making some alterations and hadn't had time to put in a self-closing air brick. So I suggested they used aluminium tape. They turned on all the water, they put the waves on, all these people were inside the house, and I was panicking, thinking, please let it work. I don't want them to have wet feet. I also put a colleague in there, and not a drop came through. And I've also tested it in their air brick tank, and again, not a drop came through. It's 15 quid a roll for a very large roll. It would do loads of air bricks, and also that's it up the door. And then in the top picture, somebody in Todmorden in Yorkshire had made that wooden out of marine ply barrier and sealed it with silicone sealer every time he got a flood warning, and it worked until he got a higher flood. So you don't have to spend vast amounts of money to start along the road to property flood resilience. And also, look, preparing your loo. There's some pictures. I forgot to put my own toilet on it, but there's pictures here of toilets when the water's backed up. Non-return valves and puddle pumps and pan seals, they're all in the flood pod. Even a flood sack that you can roll up and put down the loo. Each one of those will absorb 21 litres of water. And if you're desperate, a deflated children's football, put down there and pushed as hard as you can. I put it down my loo and flushed the chain, and it held the water up there for a long time. In fact, I had to take it out so I could go to the toilet. But you know, that's better than nothing. Not as good as the certified stuff, but better than nothing. And look, these are wonderful pictures of property flood resilience measures working. And I love the one with the sandbags failing. Unfortunately, the photo doesn't show the dry red shoes on this side of the barrier, but you can see the cars. That was Storm Babette in the carport had stopped the flood water coming in, and also the little one. There's no water in their garage either. And exterior floodgates can keep the water out. You can see the left-hand photo is left to you, isn't it? The man standing there with dry feet. So you don't have to sort of flag up your house at risk of flooding. All these things can help reduce the impact. And this is a house fully fitted with property flood resilience products. The windows are flood proof. The door is a certified flood door, and the barriers are inside of the garage. So if you go away on holiday, you can shut the garage and not flag up the fact you're on holiday. So all these things have given this lady that lives here, who's in her 80s, peace of mind that she can take back control. And these are exterior flood barriers. The box wall in the bright red one actually held back a tidal surge up in Lancashire not very long ago, and it had to be put in place very quickly, and it worked. And the one at the top, the bungalow owner had rung me to say that every time it rained hard, they were flooded with overland runoff. And you can see that the water is stopped in its tracks there, and they stopped flooding. And then that's a big hotel in Cumbria, and their car park is kept dry. So there's lots of things you can do. And you probably all saw the famous King Canute that was successful in Worcestershire. He's a great friend of mine, and he had lots of recoverable measures that are very dear to my heart, as well as flood barriers in his house. But the River Severn, instead of flooding once every 9 years, flooded 3 times last year, and it stays up for a very long time. And he was worried about the structure, the amount of water weight on his house. So he remortgaged and built a wall which did work. And the BBC, I tipped them off, and it had 30 million views, even in Australia and America, on their Instagram account. And you can see here that the barriers. And in fact, that photograph is their back garden, the one with the swan in their back garden. So you can see them working. Now, I've put together a homeowner's guide to property flood resilience. You see, I've got a lot of black humour, but it's a free download on my website. I try to keep it up to date, so it's got a list of every flood product in there, lots of advice and guidance, and it's got all the product manufacturers at the back. So do take note of that. And everything on my website is a free download. I will never ever charge a flood victim for anything, so it's all there. Do spend some time on my my website, and especially with the blogs. Now, a little bit about FloodMary. I hope you've all heard of FloodMary, because before FloodMary, most people couldn't get flood insurance, but it was launched in 2016, and it is really basically eligible for everybody that lives in their home with a council tax banding, provided it was built before 2009. So people we don't encourage building on the floodplain. There are leaflets about FloodMary in the flood pod. I put them out this morning. But the good thing about FloodMary, and I started lobbying for this in 2007, incidentally, we launched it at the House of Commons in 2022, Build Back Better. So they've gone into partnership with all the insurance companies, and the majority of the big players are signed up for this. So if you do get flooded, you can get an extra £10,000 on top of your insurance claim to help you build back better. So install those flood products, or install resilient repair, or even landscape your garden, because they are to make it flood resilient. So you can use those three options, and there's details about that if you type Build Back Better into the FloodMary website. Now, I'm going to give you some examples from my ebook of people that regularly flood. And as you can see here, Ian, if you can imagine, he lives right next to the river. He's got a little garden and the towpath, and then the river. And he knew the house flooded, but people are drawn to water, aren't they? And the former owner would really just basically let the water in and let it out again and then sanitized. But Ian, being an engineer, he was determined to keep the water out, even the mighty River Severn. And he had me round to his house for advice. And this is basically what he's done. And there are more details in my ebook on the website. So he pulled up the floorboards and filled it in with the floor with concrete. And then he put a waterproof slurry to about 1 metre high. And he's got flood doors and flood windows. And he did tell me that it was very surreal watching fish swim past his window while it was flooding. He's got non-return valves and a puddle pump. Now, a puddle pump, there's one in the flood pod. It's an amazing bit of kit. You can sit it on the floor, attach a hose to it, lob it out of the window, and it will keep water down to about 1 millimetre, hence its name, puddle pump. So a few of those in a house that gets deep flooding can really help. And all the electrics were raised high. And you can see here that he's got cupboards on legs, and that's another flood door with an escape hatch, so he can get out if he wants to. And you can see the main photo, that's the amount of water he gets in from the mighty River Severn. And he feels so confident, he literally stands, you can't really see in the photographs, his furniture on blocks about that high. And when the river's gone down, and it stays up for a long time, there's the River Severn, he lets it down, sanitizes it, and he's back watching the telly that night. So he's absolutely delighted with what he's done. Now, alternatively, in the same terrace of houses, Lynn decided that she wasn't going to keep the water out. she would let it in, and she has flooded on many occasions. And I haven't unfortunately included the 3 last year, haven't had time to update it. But she, when she bought the house, expected the river to flood every 9 years. And now it's at least once a year. And she's getting a little bit fed up of it. But when I asked her, would she still buy the house if she knew? And she said, look, yes, look at the view I've got. I'm 5 minutes from the centre of Worcester, and the river doesn't come that often, and I can manage it. I just love where I live. So everybody that I've interviewed have all said the same, they wouldn't move. And this is what Lynn's done. The floors have been lifted and rebuilt on block and beam to aid faster drying. And she's got water fled underfloor heating. She's got closed cell insulation, which is waterproof, and large marble tiled floors. Now, incidentally, if you're thinking of doing that, make sure you don't use the dob and dab technique, that you put the waterproof adhesive under the whole tile, and the bigger the tile, the better. And then waterproof grout, obviously. She's tiled her skirtings, and she's inset them into the plaster, so it stops the moisture from being drawn into the plaster. And she's got a limelight plaster which can recover from being flooded. And instead of metal beading to the corners, she's got plastic beading which won't rust. And you can see here she's got her fridge, freezer, and all her white goods in a cupboard. And she's also got a kitchen. It's a floating kitchen. It's sold by Wren Kitchens, not as a flood resilient kitchen, but just as a kitchen where the units don't come down to the floor. And she uses that, and you can see that it's one of them. She's got glass bricks holding them up, and she's also concreted her first floor stairs, first 4 steps of the stairs, because that's how deep the water gets. And quite a few of the residents along that road have done that. Now, she just, when the water's gone, she pumps it out, sanitizes it, and lights her fires. It's not a picnic, this, but it saves moving out of your home for on average 9 months, and huge insurance bills and massive disruption, because recovery from the flood, as many of you will know, is far worse than the flood itself. Karen, oh heck, I'm going to ignore you. Right, okay. Karen in Appleby moved into her house, and she was very badly flooded to over 5 foot. She was out of her home for 8 months, and a £48,000 insurance bill, no matter, and that was 2015. Just imagine how much that would be now. But after building back better, fitting barriers, having a household flood plan, changing everything, very similar to the other case studies, she was flooded again to 5 centimetres, which she pumped out, sanitised, and was back home with no insurance claim within 24 hours. And again, Martin in Leeds, very, very similar story, but he used a membrane system. And if you want to talk to me, just grab me about membrane systems. And he's got self-closing air bricks. And he's also, incidentally, got plastic flooring. So this looks like laminate flooring. We've got some in the flood pod, comes in all sorts of colours. He's numbered it. So if he gets flooded, he can pull it up and wash it, put it down again. He says that his incontinent cat caused more problems than the raging river outside his home. And then there's some examples of flood resilient kitchens. And again, you can see them closer up because I've put them in the flood pod. And I can recommend my ebook if you would like to read more. The stories in there are from real people, and they're truly inspirational. And then there's this lovely graphic, really balancing and all that I've talked about, knowing your flood risk, preparing and planning the flood resilience products, and very importantly, allowing your house to recover. And I'll finish with this lovely photograph. We all love our dogs, don't we? And these poor dogs were flood victims, and they had to go on a boat to go and do their business. So thank you very much for listening to me.